All right, welcome to the next episode of the Leading Through Loss podcast. I am very excited to have Jonathan Fennell with me. And before we get started, Jonathan, do you prefer Jonathan or John? Should I say that before we started?
Jonathan is fine. I go by
Jonathan?
both. Yeah.
All right, well, so I've been following you on LinkedIn and seeing a lot of your posts, and they've really been resonating with me. Very open, honest, vulnerable, and obviously they're resonating with people who are reading them and commenting on them. So I thought I'd love to have you on the show. So first of all, maybe we just turn it over to you and just say, I'd love to hear a little bit about your backstory and what it is that makes it so important to you to write and communicate about the things that you do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate the invitation to talk about this. I also just want to acknowledge how much I appreciate what you do. I think it's important to create space to talk about this. We go through the world and we put on our armor and we pretend that everything is perfect. And I think we know that that's a lie, right? In our own lives and probably in the lives of those around us. So, for purposes of LinkedIn and, what I've shared, it has to do with my brother and his journey from successful businessman to substance abuse to prison to, a violent death last year. Before that, mine has been a life that's, marked by various instances of loss, a lot of experience with loved ones with incarceration, mental illness, suicide attempts, just a lot, starting about the age of 10, loss of a child, and just realizing that I think we're our best selves when we can acknowledge these things. Just by way of background, I'm married to a woman who's a licensed marriage and family counselor. Some of the tools that she has, some of the things that she's encouraged me to do in terms of just even naming the emotions that we have and acknowledging the reality and the power that they have over us kind of breaks the spell sometimes that they have. So yeah, like I said, for purposes of LinkedIn, it's been tied to my brother and, that tragedy that played out last year. And not just the loss of a person, but really it's the loss of a dream. We had been working towards something together, his release, his reintegration with his family, a lot of things along those lines that were sort of driving this that sort of ended prematurely. And from my perspective, what do you do when you've been working so hard for years on something? Supporting somebody for such a long time, and then it just stops unexpectedly. So, like I said, I feel like there needs to be space for people who go through these challenging things, maybe not that specifically, but life generally. When it throws us a curve, offer them space, offer them, stability, fixed points, solid ground, if you would, to sort of weather the storm and, come out on the other side, still standing. Right. So that's it.
Yeah, awesome. And maybe just so one thing I wanted to comment, and then I'll just ask you what you do for a living too. But I was just thinking as you were talking, my wife is so good at seeing through my own BS. So she's not a marriage and family therapist, so I can't imagine how transparent you must be to your wife.
Even when I don't try to be, she can see right through it, right? And I think that's the thing. You're exposed.
Yeah.
And with kids too, they sort of can call you out on it and they can see the struggle. And I think I've just learned to acknowledge, holidays can be really hard for lots of reasons. And I just acknowledge that to my wife, like, hey, holidays can sort of hit me. I don't know why they hit me, but they hit me. And I'm acknowledging that sort of a default setting. And then I do have the capacity to make a choice, right? I can sort of succumb to the strong feelings or I can fight against them. Maybe give them some vent and then sort of focus on the things that I have to be thankful for still. As for what I do for a living, we're so much bigger than what we do. Currently, I'm employed as an in-house attorney. I've been an attorney for 20 years or so. I've been a litigator. I've been in-house. Before I was an attorney, I was a teacher. I taught grades 4 through 12. And, in that process of being up in front of kids and learning the power of, I won't say transparency, but, you're responsible for the culture in the classroom. You're responsible for the mood. You're responsible for all sorts of things, psychological safety, emotional safety. And you want these kids to thrive and to grow and to be honest, with their struggles, not to bury them. And, it was a 5-year sort of lesson of how to serve other people. Um, watching kids struggle with things that you've struggled with and trying to offer encouragement, but not, just telling them to toughen up or, suck it up and get through it. It was a wonderful experience, right? It was just an emotionally taxing experience, but, teaching is so much more than just subject matter expertise. You're really teaching the next generation how to live, hopefully, and hopefully how to live well.
Yeah. I imagine there must be some similarities between like a recalcitrant 12th grader and being an attorney.
Sometimes, ideally, people as an attorney, I'll say the default problem, at least I have, is that my go-to tool is reason. It's argumentation. It's thinking that logic is going to carry the day. And logic does not always carry the day. There's a lot of times we make emotional decisions and we use logic to sort of back into that decision and, tell ourselves what a great logical decision it was, but it was really emotions that were leading it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, not just the 12th graders, but, even with your own kids, you realize that they need to know that you care first before they care about what you have to say. Even if you're spot on, even if you're right, they have to know you care, right? They have to know that you 100% have their back. You're interested in their thriving, in growth and development. And it starts there, I think, right? And that's just an honesty that has to be sort of in the room. It has to be stated for some people. I don't think we can take that for granted ever. To me, it's important that we actually say some of these things to set the mood in the room, whether it's with our kids, with our loved ones, or even with our colleagues. There's just something about that to look at someone and say, hey, look, I don't know what's going on in your life, but you matter to me. If you're going through a hard time, I'm here to support you. You can share whatever it is you want to share, or you can let me know what you need. But, I'm here. I've got your back. I'm, willing to help however I can. You just let me know.
Yeah. So you mentioned you had, suffered a fair amount of losses when you were younger, and you can go into as much or little detail as you want, but I'm curious about maybe, if there was a specific dynamic or history, like in your family situation that maybe caused you to suffer so much loss, like whether there was mental health issues or addiction or trauma or anything. But I'd also love to hear how the loss you faced when you were younger shaped the worldview you have today.
That's a big question. I'll try to
I bet.
unpack it a little bit without throwing anybody under the
Yeah.
bus. When I was 10, I became aware of my mother not being right. That's the best way I can describe it. Really odd, erratic behavior. It hits you differently in life. My youngest is 11. So as I look at her and where she's at, and then I think back to where I was when I was about the same age, you realize it did something to you. Your sense of psychological safety, your sense of, your tribe being a safe place completely evaporated. In the specific instance, I can talk about it. I was picked up from a friend's house one Tuesday afternoon in November. I was in fifth grade, and my mother proceeded to drive me off to Arizona. So that's, I'm living in the suburbs of Los Angeles. She picks me up. She drives off to Arizona while in a full psychotic breakdown, laughing, crying, irrational behavior. And, you're 10 years old. You have no idea what's going on. This person who's supposed to be safe is not herself. She's not safe. And you're just terrified, right? You're just absolutely terrified. You don't know if you'll see your family again. This is, pre-cell phones. This is pre a lot of things. Like, I just disappear. And, I don't recall all the details of that drive. It did end up with me back at home in the middle of the night. It did end up, with me, in my bed and waking up and, going to school the next day, like nothing happened. And I think it was, that sort of thing where home became an unsafe environment. And there are other things that were spiraling. My mom's oldest two kids, about this time, started having issues with substance abuse, local law enforcement, in and out of the system, older brother who was dealing drugs. home was not a safe environment. School was a safe environment. School was an environment where, there's bullies and there's other issues that are school, but it's not unsafe in the same way. So, you sort of buttress yourself against this new threat environment. I did have a younger brother, which was very helpful for purposes of giving me a focus point. My focus was on keeping him as safe as possible. When my mom was institutionalized, I became the default caretaker. I did the dishes, I did the cleaning, I did the laundry. I did a lot of things, just stepping up and trying to provide that stability for him. And that sort of became the focus, right? It wasn't about how I felt about things. It was just showing up and doing the work that needed to be done. So, if I've got to forge off to Mike's room and recover dishes and deal with drug paraphernalia and alcohol, I'm just throwing that stuff away as I find it, or I'm dumping it out. And I'm doing the dishes, right? And then I'm focused on the next thing. So sort of a very pragmatic approach, devoid of emotional attachment, certainly not a woe is me sort of feel sorry for myself, to my detriment. And I'll acknowledge that is to my detriment. But as a kid, I didn't see the benefit of going through the feels, if you would, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Like
I can totally, yeah.
Yeah, all there is in front of me is two older brothers who are violent, abusive, a mom who's in and out of the system, and she went in and out of the system. And there were various, times you were hopeful, and then you have loss of first coming back to untreated mental illness. And, I learned, it's so hard, right, to say what you learned, because I was that kid who still hoped. I still hope. There were a couple other times that she did things, and maybe I got burned by it, but I just sort of learned to focus on taking care of my younger brother, trying to build bridges with these people where they're at and offering support and stability, not reacting. There were a few occasions when I did react, but otherwise you're just trying to show up and do what needs to be done because it needs to be done.
Mm.
And, the other point, I guess, to elaborate on is there were no supports really for my dad. The fear was my dad walking out. These are, my mom's two sons that are causing all the turmoil. And then there's my mom. But my dad had no siblings. His parents were dead at this point. He had nobody. He had his job, right? He had a job. He was disappearing too. He's driving off to IBM. And he had his job, and he had no idea what he was coming back to day to day. So, the way I figured it was I needed to give him as much support as I could. I needed to normalize and sort of hold down the fort as much as I could. And again, this started at 10. So that's one of those things where you realize you grow up really quickly. You are not a kid. You are thinking like an adult. And it just sort of skews the way you experience life in many regards. It's very cautious. It's very guarded. It's not optimistic. It's not hopeful. The other thing too with chronic conditions is it's not like there's a cure. It's not like, hey, we'll push through hard times and things will just magically get better. You could sort of see the cycle play out, and you dare to hope maybe the first couple times, and then you sort of settle into this is the way it is, right? So what does that mean for me? And again, my focus was on what do I control? Environment, school, academics, athletics, things like that I could control is where I started to focus.
Oh man, there's so much there. Holy, I think a couple things. One is when you're talking about how you didn't allow yourself to experience emotions and really just didn't feel the feels. I mean, it's such a normal, a human experience, because you're basically your sense of danger. You're constantly in fight or flight, right? I mean, and when you're fight or flight, your body is not telling you, yeah, just stop for a second and just see what's going on inside of you right now. No, get the hell out of here, man.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, so, but I think too, like part of I've done a fair amount of work with guys dealing with mental health issues, for example, and one of the most, like, not one of the most common, literally every single person I have ever spoken to has had a traumatic, trauma in the past, and they don't understand how at 45 years old, let's say, that the things that are happening to me now there's a direct connection between what happened all that time ago. Because, part of, I think, of healing is when you look at your situation, you had coping strategies that allowed you to survive a very, very difficult situation at a very young age. I think part of the healing process is like recognizing that those patterns no longer serve you and trying to break free from them, but it's really friggin' hard, because that sense of safety, when that is violated at a young age by people you're supposed to be able to trust, man, that's hard to get back.
Yeah, that hypervigilance, right? You have all sorts of coping skills, protective tools, the shell you put around you. And, as you go into life, if you don't acknowledge that those are, crutches that you've been relying on, it really impairs your ability to have I'd say a healthy relationship, at least as healthy as it could be. So, I realized that I went into this hypervigilant state. I was always expecting something bad to happen. So whenever things were good, they weren't really good, right? It was the calm before the next storm. And so you're always sort of aware of this edge that you have. And then early on in my marriage, I realized what I would do is I'd almost sort of provoke a fight with my wife just to sort of assuage or alleviate that sense of edge, sort of like something bad is going to happen. So think of it as like a controlled burn. If I can have a little fight with my wife, it's going to take that edge off, because now the bad thing has happened. And it becomes this vicious loop, though, right? You have this stress and anxiety about something bad happening. You force something unpleasant to happen. These were not, gigantic fights. My wife is much too smart to engage in that, and she'd call me out on it. But then once you have that and you have that release, you go right back in that heightened state of waiting for the next thing. And so it's that awareness to say, wait a second, something is really screwed up with the way that I am now relating to the world around me. I've talked to my wife about this, how, part of this is I gaslight myself. Even today, it's easy to look back and gaslight yourself and think maybe it wasn't that bad. And she reminds me, it's a matter of perspective that you get with distance and safety, right? When you're close to a wild animal, you're in danger. When you're a mile away from the wild animal, looking at it through binoculars, you're not in danger. So to have that same emotional response is something where you have to train yourself to say, I feel this way because I went through something. And I need to pause and I need to acknowledge that. And I need to realize that that emotional response is no longer helpful. It's not serving me. So to your point, it's really hard, right? It's really, really hard to sort of just embrace a good, normal, boring life and not look for these adrenaline hits or, anything that's giving you that pulse quickening sensation that you're kind of used to, right? So just wake up, go to work, whatever that sort of normal, fixed, boring thing looks like. That's not a bad thing. That's what I don't want to say it's what we should aspire to, but when I was a teacher, I'd tell my kids, because they'd always complain about life being boring. I'd always tell them boring's not bad. It's really a matter of perspective. If you're being chased around by somebody wielding a weapon, it's exciting, but that's not good excitement, right? That default, that boredom or lack of excitement is somehow bad is, I think, number one, where you've got to embrace that as a norm. I want a normal, predictable life, as a father and as a husband. I want routine. I want, again, these fixed points where we can sort of come back and anchor ourselves to these. And, the excitement is by taking risks or doing challenges that we invite upon ourselves, right? To sort of grow and learn and develop. Or it's just what life throws at us, but we still come back to these fixed points. Like, you've got your family. If you're a person of faith, you've got your faith. You've got your friends. You've got these things that you build off of. And I mean, and to me, it's important. Maybe this just goes back to being a teacher, but seeing kids struggle, or seeing kids who didn't have ideal home environments and they feel like there's something wrong with them, or somehow they've got to hide that. The big shame for them is being exposed as someone who's struggling. There is no shame in that. There's no shame in being somebody who struggles. You did not, sort of deal yourself this hand. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just like we don't deal ourselves all sorts of hands that we're dealt in life. And, having that wisdom to say, okay, I'm not in control. I have some agency, but I don't have perfect control over this situation. But where do I want to go and why? And I'll pause after this, but I think the one thing my wife taught me that carries me through, and it really helps with what I do today in law, is she's focused on solutions-based counseling. What does the solution look like? Sort of using that vision of where people want to be, and then you backtrack from that to where you are, and you start putting forward the steps as to how you get there. That's the helpful thing, right? In a point of conflict, you'd ask somebody, what does a resolution look like for you? What do you want, right? What is it that we're aiming for and seeking after? What's the good? We're sort of invoking philosophical principles and identifying that, and then figuring out where we are and how we can take steps towards that objective that we've identified.
All the work that we do is related to something called, it's all based on an approach called appreciative inquiry, and which is really it's a way of it's an approach to change, but it's also a way of looking at the world. And what you just said really resonated with that, because what people's tendency is we are just inherently wired and conditioned to focus on everything that is wrong, broken, or missing. So when you tell people, so often when you ask people what they actually want, they tell you what they don't want. Right? Like, so, hey, like, how, what do you want the end of the year? What do you want next year to look like? Oh man, I just want to be so much less stressed. Okay, well, right. But you could be less stressed and still be a complete jerk to everybody around you.
Right. Right.
So focus on what you want, because positive images of the future inspire positive action in the present. So I really love that. And I wanted to touch on the hypervigilance thing too, because I'm curious about when you started to realize this, because, for me, when my wife was, before she took her own life, the 5 years leading up to that were just a nightmare of mental health issues. She was bipolar. A lot of, like, the way you were kind of describing your mother actually was it was almost similar to that in a way. So, and so every single day was unpredictable. Every single aspect of our lives felt like it was oriented around responding to whatever mental health crisis was coming next, etc. And I did not realize, man, until literally earlier this year, that for the past 15 years, I have been in a perpetual state of hypervigilance, because it's like, that doesn't mean, I thought hypervigilance was like, again, the cop who won't sit with the back to the door, like, I'm not like scanning my environment for physical
Yeah.
threats, but I'm
Yeah.
always wound up prepared to face an emotional threat. But it wasn't until in a therapy session where I actually experienced like a complete sense of calm that I realized how far away from that I operate in a different universe from that, man. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so, it was amazing though, because I'm like, I've done lots of personal development work and blah, 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 all that stuff. And this was a force guiding my life, like, or significantly influenced my life for so long. And I was completely oblivious to it.
Yeah. It's like you have, if we use sort of like the force of gravity, there's some body out there that's exerting a force on you and you can't see it and you're unaware of it, but it's affecting your trajectory. Right. So I think until you acknowledge that and you can find some other forces out there that pull you away from that break you out of it. To your point, or to your question about when I realized it, this was something that, right away there was an immediate danger. Going back to this, psychotic road trip with my mom, uh, right away she's an immediate threat. Right. Next day, my dad disappears. He goes off to work. So now I've got a psychotic mom. I don't know what's going on with her. I've got two older brothers. The family's sort of in chaos and free fall. So I don't trust her. I don't recall getting in the car with her alone for probably 3 years. Like, I don't trust this woman. I don't know what's going to happen. It plays out, right? I mean, I would get in the car with her and other people. 4 years later, she tried to run off with my brother and me and fly us off to Texas. And, we took her keys and walked out. We were in a different city and we walked off with her keys and spent probably 4 or 5 hours just wandering around San Diego. From my dad's perspective, he has no idea where his kids have disappeared to. I think we called him collect off of a payphone. And again, once that sort of episode was done, we were back in school because school was normal, boring, predictable, safe. And then as a senior, and this is probably the first time I realized the power of vulnerability and just being open with people. As a senior, she wanted to talk, and I trusted her, and she drove by the house because she was separated from my dad at the time. And, against my better judgment, I'd say I got in the car with her and, seed control entirely. And she drove me off to a psychiatric institution, probably an hour and a half away. And she told me I had to go into the psychiatric institution. And I said, I don't need to go into the psychiatric institution. I don't have any problems. And she disappeared inside the psychiatric institution. And about 45 minutes later, 4 orderlies walked out and, asked if I'm Jonathan and told me that I was to come with them. And they didn't put their hands on me, right? I'm smart enough to not make a bolt for it, but I very distinctly remember 2 walking point, front and back, and being escorted by 4 orderlies into the psych ward and being checked in, right? Stripped down, put into a gown. They take your shoelaces, and they process you. And my dad doesn't know where I am. Nobody who's safe knows where I'm at that time. So you go through the system. You don't create flack. They're doing their job. You're compliant. You're cooperative. You ask when you can make a phone call. You make a phone call, right? Dad wasn't home, called a friend, collect, and sort of dropped that on his mom that, I'm in a psychiatric institute and need my dad to come get me. But that was a Sunday. That Monday, I was in school. That Monday, I was at baseball practice. That Monday, guys on the team were talking about their weekends. And I just sort of let it drop that I was institutionalized yesterday. My mom drove me off to the psych ward and checked me in. And my dad drove down and checked me out. And, you could feel the atmosphere change, right, when you said that. And I'm not trying to get special treatment by the guys, but it's just sort of like this happened, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but this happened. And at that point, those guys started looking out for me a little bit differently than they had been, right? This was a private school. I was not one of the K to 12 kids there. I transferred in 11th grade, so I, didn't know these guys well. But thereafter, they were checking in just to say, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? So to your question about the hypervigilance, it started early. And I think it's always been there. And I knew it was there, right? I didn't trust my mom. I didn't realize how much of a hold it had on my life, though, until I left California and came to Michigan. And, as I was at college and doing dorm leadership training and going through the scenarios for learning how to be a resident assistant, I remember somebody made a comment because, to your point about the cop sitting with his back to the wall and scanning the room, somebody's like, dude, chill, just chill. Like you're sort of scanning what's going on and you're approaching this from like a risk analysis perspective instead of just sort of carrying yourself casually and calmly. Like nobody's going to, come out of left field and, attack you or anything like that. So that comment made me realize I was carrying this beyond just interactions with my mother, right? And it was impacting the way I was approaching the world generally. And, despite that, I still felt that the world generally was more safe than my own sort of tribe, if you would, right? The family is the first tribe. So it put me in this tension where I had hypervigilance, which was telling me to not trust the broader world around me, which is not unsmart, right? That's a smart approach. But at the same time, I had this drive to find safety in the one place that I knew wasn't unsafe, which was the world outside. So it put you in this tension of your own tribe isn't safe. Maybe the world outside is where you get your supports, but at the same time, this hypervigilance is making you wary of everybody that's out there. Like everything's a potential threat, and that's exhausting. It's a terrible way to live.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I remember, so I didn't, when my wife took her own life, my kids were like 6 and 5, and I had no idea, man, about the impact of childhood trauma because, as I've said, people get sick of me saying this, but I I grew up in a household that where there was no trauma at all. I mean, my parents weren't overly emotionally expressive, but I mean, they were always around. They loved me. Like there was no violence or fighting, and I just the older I get, the more grateful I become for having, you know, for having that. So I didn't understand anything about childhood trauma, and I also didn't understand actually the extent of my wife's childhood trauma because we were together for 16 years and she told me some of it, but she did not tell me all of it till like very close to the bitter end, let's say. And I remember reading this afterward, like just actually maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I read this book called "What Happened to You," and it's actually by Oprah and this child psychologist or psychiatrist or something. And it's really just them. It's almost like a transcript of their conversation. One thing that stands out from the book is he said, if you look into like order of say preference, the number one, like the ideal thing is to have two, like to have consistently good parents. The next the next is to have consistently bad parents. What's actually even worse is completely unpredictable parents. Because it just absolutely messes with your sense of safety and predictability and certainty.
Well, on that point, it's a vulnerable thing to say, and it feels like a horrible thing to say. But as a kid, you think of loss, you think of losing somebody to death as being the ultimate bad thing. And I pause and I say, I don't know that that is. That's a horrible thing to go through, but it is a fixed point. It's a horrible fixed point, but you can say death sucks. And now what? What does life look like without that loved one? And to your point about the chaos, it's hard with an untreated mental illness because I didn't lose this parent to death, but I lost this parent to something else that's wild and unpredictable and dangerous and risky. And so instead of, this harmonious family life and then death and loss, and now it's harmonious, but there's absence and there's grief. There was a harmonious family life and then I've lost it, but I've lost it to sort of this untreated mental illness, right? And so you've got this guilt feeling of what a horrible person I am for feeling like death would have been a better outcome than untreated mental illness, right? You've got these feelings of shame because I'm not proud of my parents, my mom. We were that house on the street where the cops were there, the police department was there, the paramedics were there, and it's just a constant state of crisis. And that's I don't know. I don't want to compare sort of bad things, right? All I know, it was something that really sort of impacted you. So it's important to understand these traumatic events and not to wallow in victimhood at all. I think it's just to your point about healing, we have to know what's pulling on us. We have to know how it's sort of altered our wiring, if you would, right? Our default approach to the world. We have to learn how to trust. We have to learn who to trust. We need to learn also what trust looks like. And something you said, I mean, with your parents and the sort of happy home, it almost feels like that's just supposed to happen or that's just the default. And we don't understand always how much hard work goes into that, right? And I think that's part of this is just acknowledging the challenge of like, look, life is hard. Life knocks us down. Life pulls all sorts of things on us. And again, we choose how we respond. We choose the attitude that we have. We choose, again, to sort of come back to these fixed points and these guiding principles and values. And that's what we come back to, right? At least for me, that's what it comes back to. And I've been transparent with my wife. I think that's the starting point. We've almost been together now 30 years, which is mind-boggling to me.
Congratulations.
But, oh, thank you. Well, we're not there yet. We still got half a year. She might figure out that she's, picked the wrong guy. But that trust, right, and that transparency and that vulnerability has to be there for, I'd say, the strongest possible relationship, right? If I'm keeping secrets, if I'm struggling and I'm not acknowledging it, if I If I think I'm strong enough, and I think that's one of the dangers as men that we have, is that I'm strong enough. I've got this. I've got this. And I think the danger is thinking we're strong enough to handle some of these things by ourselves instead of saying, you know what, maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I don't have this. Maybe I need some help. Because, it's sort of like, I don't know, I don't rock climb, but I'd say it's sort of like rock climbing and, going freestyle, right? Without a harness or with a harness. Like you think you're good enough, you can do it without a harness, and you quickly realize you're not good enough. My default approach now, I think, is just to acknowledge maybe I got it, maybe I don't. Like I'll just make sure I've got a safety system in place, right? I'm not trying to go out and I guess I don't know how to articulate this. We're not always as strong as we think we are. Sometimes we're stronger, sometimes we're not. And I think just putting ourselves in an environment where it's okay to not be strong enough, but we're also not going to be effective catastrophically if we're not strong enough when we need to be, right? Again, people checking in with you, you have processes, systems in place. I read your post last night. Really appreciate that vulnerability there. And, kudos to your wife to say just that presence, just being present. And, I think you made the point of just not shaming, not blaming, but just sort of calling out to you and saying, this is going to be hard, but I need you to do this, right?
Stay sober, asshole.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank God I haven't struggled with sobriety issues. And that's not because of willpower or anything. That's because I had two older brothers that I watched them sort of destroy their lives through addiction, right? And you just realize like that's a pitfall. That's going to reach out and grab you. It's going to offer consolation, maybe numbness. Maybe you don't know what it offers other than an escape from the pain. And I think that's where you say, but it didn't turn out good for them. So what other alternatives do I have? I mean, I can sit with the pain for a while. I can sit with disappointment. I can sit with loss. I can sit with those types of things. But again, coming back to that solutions-based focus and what would I like and what does that look like? And I think this is where it's important to lean on other people because sometimes we're short-sighted and we don't know what the world might look like, right? There's our concept of the world. There's what we can imagine, but we're finite. We don't have we don't have perfect clarity on what different outcomes might look like. And that's why I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who can build in and create these visions or share with you other visions for what the world can look like. And it could be something we never imagined. And when we subscribe to that, it can give us hope. It can give us a direction. It can give us purpose. So, in reading that post of yours last night, that just sort of jumped out at me that what your wife is doing without shaming or blaming or anything is just helping create that vision, helping create that space, helping, just sit with you in the pain, but just doing something as simple as being present. And that power of presence it's often overlooked, right? We've got to say the right thing. I'm sure you felt this, that, as you suffer grief and people come to you and seek to console, they want to say the right thing sometimes. And we struggle. We don't know what to say, but I wouldn't say there is a right thing to say. There's an, I love you, I hurt with you. And I think it's showing up and demonstrating that love and that concern. It's not just the card. So, and like I said, I think, having gone through this, that's the thing with teams. The guys, the teams that I've led, it's a matter of saying, you matter to me. Maybe not I love you, obviously, but, I give a shit about you. You matter to me. If you're struggling, it's okay to struggle. And if you're going to show up and, you can give me a C effort today, that's okay. Show up and give me your best. And that's fine. And, we'll get through it. Or if you need time off, if you need, to take a step away, that's fine. I got you. I've got you. And just, again, acknowledging that and normalizing. I think it's important to just normalize topics and discussions around these types of things. When my brother, just segueing really quick to my brother, these things sneak up on you. So it was Good Friday, it wasn't 1998. It was Good Friday, 2008. And I get a phone call that my brother's holed up in his house with a SWAT team surrounding it. And he's suicidal. And, he's taking shots out the window. The phone call comes, and I'm here in Michigan, and my wife and my then 2-year-old daughter are sitting on, in our family room watching a movie on Friday night, just sort of watching a movie. And the reality of this chaos and this tumult just sort of comes across that phone line, and it occupies that space right away. Well, it had been just a lovely sort of family evening with, your 2-year-old and your wife, is threatened. And making, I don't remember where I was going with this, but this juxtaposition between what I wanted, the calm, the peace, the familial tranquility and harmony that I wanted, and then these demons from the past, right? These things that you're trying to escape, sort of manifesting themselves and coming out and reaching out to you. It was hard. I know where I was going with this. And this happened on a Friday, and Monday, I think Friday ended with me getting a call that he had been shot. Didn't know if he was going to survive.
Jonathan, can I ask you a question? So, I mean, obviously, something like this, I would assume, comes as a gigantic shock. But I mean, what was before this happened? What was? I mean, how would you describe your brother's state of mind, or in your relationship with him?
A good question. Good question. And really fast. The one point I was going to say on this is when this happened with him on this Friday, I went back to work on Monday and didn't say a thing about it to anybody, right? Didn't feel like you could go through this gigantic, earth-shattering experience and share one word with to anybody that, hey, look, this happened. I need some time to process. As far as I knew, he was doing fine. Successful businessman, multimillionaire, raking in the money. Wife and kids, life was great, right? Life was great. That was the persona that he put out. Life was always great. And then the economy tanked. His business started struggling. He filed bankruptcy, and it spiraled really quickly. And I think some of these past behaviors, some of these past things that he had struggled with as a young man, substance abuse and the like, they reared their head. The bottle offered consolation. The bottle offered all sorts of things, and he succumbed to it, right? And in that moment of succumbing, he became suicidal. And in that moment, his wife found him and called the police because she was concerned, and it escalated. And I don't want to relive that. For me, the challenge was picking up the pieces once he was in the system, and trying to create that vision for him of what does life look like when you get out? Like, let's walk through this together, and, let me be a support person and an encouragement person for you, where you are, whatever that looks like.
Well, when he went into, I'm assuming he went to prison automatic, like right away. He didn't go to any kind of mental health facility or anything.
No. This was prison. It was, he was charged very heavily. State of intoxication doesn't factor in as a mitigating factor. Mental health crisis, one worse day, none of that factored in. He was sentenced to, I think, 20 years. Took a plea bargain because he was facing multiple felony counts. But yeah, ended up in prison after being released from the hospital, going through trial, taking a plea, and then in the system.
What is going through your head at this time as you're watching this from either close or from afar?
Heartbreak, right? Heartbreak, I think, fundamentally, is here's my immediate older brother, half brother, but, he's a guy who, wanted to play sports, wanted to build into me, wanted me to, I think, invited me to, live with him. I think I gave him a sense of purpose, taking care of the younger brother, and that's, the thing too, is I'll acknowledge, I was the fixed point. I was the glue trying to hold a family together. I supported my younger brother. I supported my dad. I supported my 2 older brothers. People would fight with each other, but nobody fought with me. But heartbreak, right? Heartbreak. And then you quickly turn towards, again, focusing on solutions. And the hard thing too for me was that the family I wouldn't say alienated him, but they didn't reach out to him. They wouldn't take the calls from the prison. Um, it's sort of like the shameful thing nobody talks about. And to be candid, I mean, my brother-in-law is a cop in the town where this happened. My sister was a dispatcher in the town where this happened. Um, so there's that family dynamic, but there's that almost immediate response of distancing yourself from things, right? When bad things happen to somebody, so often we withdraw and we step away almost like it's contagious. And I was disappointed in the family as well in having that immediate response to him, because here was a guy in crisis. And we can look at him and say he made horrible decisions and these are just the natural consequences, but that doesn't fix anything. And, you know, I'm no better. I'm a few bad decisions away from something comparable like that playing out. So yeah, just a lot of heartbreak and powerlessness. And again, I'm back at work with this sort of life altering event transpiring on the other side of the country, and there's nobody you talk to about it,
Did you
right?
not
And
want to
even
talk to? Did you not want to talk to somebody because, like, I think there's often two things at play. One is, you know, I don't know that I feel safe enough to actually, like, I'm afraid how this is going to impact how people see me. And then the other one is, no one is going to know what to say or do. Like, they're not going to be able to say or do anything to make this any better, anyways. So why would I even bring it up with them?
yeah, that's a great question. And I think, right, what's the objective in talking to someone about it? Right. When we go to therapy, we have sort of a goal or an objective, or we have an awareness that there's a problem that we're sort of working on. Um, in the workplace, I think it's a great question, right? And also, I'm a litigator, I'm a lawyer. You're not there to be emotional; you're there to be analytical and logical and solve problems. Um, I think part of it was just not the safety, right? This is a bunch of people wearing their masks, wearing their armor, and going about their lives. And this is my struggle to sort of deal with. Sort of the same thing with a family in crisis. When I went off to school, I changed schools a couple of times. I wouldn't like bring this with me to school and be, oh, hey, everybody, just so you know, like this is my background. You don't share that. Having said that, when your mother shows up at school, and the school understands what's going on and they hide you on the playground someplace, right? There are threats that people do need to be aware of, or I'd say there's just wellness initiatives, right? If you're sick, you call in and you don't go in because you're sick. Um, if there's large life events, something like this should constitute a large life event. Maybe this is on me, right? Just to say, again, I have a pattern of behavior says, go someplace safe, go someplace where there's control, go someplace where you can control the outcome, right? Based on the work that I put into it, I can control the outcome, and there's a control component or illusion. That's kind of on us, right? For me to say, hey, I'm going to go into work, but this just happened and I don't know how to process it. So we'll keep it at arm's length, but at the same time, it's impacting. So, to answer your question, it was those things, but I think it's also me, right? I think it is me because I don't know how it's going to impact me, but I do need a distraction. Sitting at work, you're going to be twiddling your thumbs, or sitting at home, you'd be twiddling your thumbs and you're powerless. So work provides a distraction. And the problem is that it's distracting you from something. And again, going back to this analogy with, gravitational pull, there's something pulling on you now that you're aware of. And you can't just say, well, work is going to be a counterforce, and therefore I'll sort of net out as a neutral. That it just doesn't work that way. So I think it's an awareness of just what's going on inside of us. And, I think there's been advances in the workplace since about mental health days, or just acknowledging the importance of saying, I'm not in a good spot. Does that feel squishy? Maybe a little bit, right? Does it, the harder, stronger, if you would, sort of previous generations would just say, suck it up and work through it. But I'd say, guys, you wouldn't do that with an illness. You wouldn't do that with a broken limb. You wouldn't do that with all sorts of injuries. Just suck it up and push through it. Like, mental health is a real thing. It is a real thing. And that's, I think, again, that's the challenge, right? Is creating workplaces where people understand there's that safety to share when they're really going through a hard time. As a leader, creating that space for your team and acknowledging that that is that's part of the world in which we live. Like lying to ourselves or stealing ourselves and telling ourselves we can just ignore these things isn't going to work. So to your point, childhood trauma is going to manifest itself. We could say, oh, I've been, successful, or it hasn't manifested itself yet, or maybe you've just got to be strong enough. But, I think the data is out there that suggests that we do have mental health crisis generally. We do walk around with these psychological wounds, scars, whatnot that affect our health and well-being, right? Whether it's stress, anxiety, relationships, relationship with, alcohol or drugs or whatnot. These things do impact us.
One thing you said before we continue with your brother, because this has been a really impactful thing for me, is I'm curious how it's been for you, but you mentioned something about when that was happening with your brother, and then, you're a couple decisions away from being in a bad spot, let's say. And I've thought that so many times, man. Like when I was younger, I would look at like homeless people and just be so full of judgment, man. Like, get your shit together, come on, And then I've over the years I've realized that there's been a couple of key points, man, where one decision that I made that could have easily turned out a different way, a much worse way. Like how close I was to finding myself, my life in a very different situation. And then I was listening to somebody talk about this the other day. I think it was on YouTube, but they were saying you're basically anybody is like 10 bad decisions away from killing someone, right? So it's like you're driving down the highway and some guy cuts you off. Okay, you honk the horn. That's decision number one. They give you the finger. You give them the finger back. That's decision number two. All of a sudden now you're pulling over, or something. And all of a sudden, boom, you're, so I'm curious, just about your sense of empathy, empathy for people that are struggling or the downtrodden, or like how your experience has influenced that.
Yeah. I'd come back to an article that I'd read written by an inmate who talked about the impact of living with the daily reality of that one bad decision. Every day you wake up and you're in a spot, prison, and you know that you're there because of that bad decision that you made. And just the way that is this giant weight, right? It's lots of us make bad decisions for which there are no long-term consequences, certainly not prison. And just reading that article had this profound sort of aha moment on me. Like, what a burden, right? What a burden to be reminded every day of the bad decision you made. And you've been reduced down to the bad decision. You're seen as a threat by society. You're seen as a threat by, prison personnel. You are that bad decision. That is your identity. I think with the empathy, with Jeff, it was a matter of, realizing, I see a bigger picture for him. I understand what transpired. I read the press articles. I can see that, but I also know the guy who sort of was in that role, right? And right away you say, so many things went wrong. Did he play his hand badly? Yes, he did. But so many other things went. And, this is where I tried to step in, started taking the phone calls, trying to give him a hope, trying to sort of fan that little flicker of a flame into something that would be, strong enough to carry him through his sentence and get him to the outside and get him back to life on the outside and what that sort of future looked like. And so, there's that. And I should also mention that, I left litigation to take a job at a nonprofit. And this nonprofit's working with people with mental health issues, developmental disabilities, rehabilitation after catastrophic injuries. And so immediately there's this acknowledgement that there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of things in life that they never asked for, right? They're born with conditions. They were involved in an accident that they didn't ask for, and it's fundamentally altered the course and trajectory of their life. And not looking on them with pity, right? Not sort of dehumanizing them and just feeling sorry for them. I still remember a guy named Brandon who's a quadriplegic, and he's in his early 20s and he's living independently. And all my interactions with him were always positive. He was always upbeat. He was always sort of thankful and focused on what he had. So I think that empathy is a matter of acknowledging the complexity of the human beings around us. I think what we're trying to do, hopefully each of us is trying to do, is to make the best decisions for ourselves or for the communities around us in a way that's helpful. It's not detrimental. It's not harmful. And it's being supportive of people in that endeavor. Like with Brandon, here he is, quadriplegic, living on his own. How can I help him? How can I support him? How can I encourage him? I mean, I work for his landlord company, but it's that. And it's the same thing with my brother, Jeff, when he's in prison. How can I help? How can I be helpful? How can I be encouraging? What can I do here to give you hope, right? Can I send you books? Can I buy you, put money on your commissary account? Can I do these little things to say, you matter to me. I see you. I'm not turning my back on you. And just encouraging the family around me to do the same. Here's a guy in prison. He's been cut off. Has he done something dumb? Yeah, he has. So don't alienate, right? This is the time to lean in. This is the time to show that you love and that you care. And I think that's a hard thing. Again, going back to this concept that certain things feel like they're potentially contagious. We avoid the people who've suffered loss. Maybe it's we don't know what to say. Maybe it's I don't know how to relate to somebody who's gone through something so profound, or I don't have anything to offer to somebody who suffered from something so profound. I remember I had a really good friend who was a sheriff and a Marine. And when his dad died, he called me to let me know that his dad died. And this is a man's man who's in tears. And I just asked him, how can I help? And his response, it still sticks with me. He said, I just want you to make me laugh. I just want you to make me laugh. Just want you to come over and sit with me, make me laugh, help me, process. And so it's seeing people, right? It's creating that space and that safety for people to reach out. And maybe they don't know what they want. Maybe they don't know what they need. And, the point I said about catching vision from other people around us who might see things that we don't see. I think sometimes it's a matter of just showing up for the people around us and just that humility to say, this person has a need. Maybe I can meet it. Maybe I can't, but at least I can be encouraging, right? Life's beating them down. Don't kick them when they're down, right? Life's already done that.
Well, and I think too, it's also important for people to understand that empathy is not does not mean agreement. It does not mean having no boundaries. It's none of those things. It just means doing your best to try to understand the other person's perspective, but it doesn't excuse bad behavior or any of those things.
No. To your point about the honk on the horn because of the coat, cut off and the finger and then the finger.
Yeah.
It's like when we respond to strong emotional impulses, it's seldom good, right? It's seldom good. And it's creating that space or it's putting those brakes in place to say, this guy's really pissed off, right? The power of just even saying like, hey, I'm sorry if, what I did upset you. I'm not trying to piss you off. And just understanding how that can de-escalate a scenario. This is not a zero-sum life. It feels like that. I'm not saying there's no competition at all, but in certain instances, I mean, come on, traffic. The guy cuts you off and now he's in front of you. Like, how mature are we to think that, somehow this great injustice has been done and all of our strong visceral emotions need to be, harnessed to check this evildoer? I'm like, this is just a dude who might be in a hurry for some reason that's, you don't know. You don't know the story. Maybe he's got a crisis going on and he's trying to get someplace quickly. Maybe
100%.
he's just, and maybe he's just not in that spot. Going back to what you said in terms of experience calm. He's not had that. He's rushing around. He's trying to, put out all the fires, do all the things. He's this reactive force in a world around us. And that's a horrible way to go through life, right? It's just as a reactive force. So I think that's saying, look, we have a choice how to react, right? We don't have to react. We can acknowledge the power of emotion over us and in other people, and then just creating space, right?
Yeah.
It's how we even greet somebody. If there's an accident, are you showing concern for the other person? Or are you coming out with guns blazing, fight or flight, like you mentioned, with these sort of trauma-informed responses instead of saying, "Hey, are you okay?" Just checking in with you. Are you okay?
Yeah, it's the. I mean, like you're describing the fundamental attribution error, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
if somebody else does something bad, it's because they're a bad person. When I do something bad, it's because of the circumstance. But I always
absolutely.
think of it like whenever there's a gap in our knowledge, we do this thing called sense making, right? So whenever there's a gap in our knowledge, we make human beings do not like an incomplete picture because we're always trying to make sense out of the world. And so when there's a gap in our knowledge, we make up a story to fill in the gap. And because we have such a negativity bias, the story we end up making up tends to be the worst. So I don't know why that guy cut me off. I don't know
Right,
why this person sent me that email, but so I'm going to make up a story about it because I hate wondering. But then the story I make up is terrible. So I always tell people, if you're going to make up a story about somebody else's intentions, why don't you just make up one where they're good? You
right,
know, I
right.
mean, unless they give you irrefutable evidence that they're a horrible person, I mean, just assume they're good. Most people are. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful point, right? I mean, a little room for grace and humility to say, I don't know what's going on. And, the default would be this is a decent person going about normal activities, not trying to create, again, chaos and not trying to piss you off, right? You're not out to piss them off. So why we get bent out of shape so quickly, um, it certainly doesn't help with the things we consume. And I think that's the other thing that's important as we go through our grief struggles and as we interact with social media and algorithms that sort of feed us based on what we look at. Right. When we buy into this narrative of the world being a bad place and we click on things or read things or consume things that confirm this perception, it's a very slippery slope, right? It's a very slippery slope, and we have to find a way to dig in. We have to find a way to come back to what you just said. It's like, I don't have the big picture. I don't know everything that's going on. And I'm okay with that. I think that's the biggest thing is just being okay with not knowing it. Or if we're adding details, just acknowledging that we really don't even know. We're just adding details to scratch that itch because we can't handle an incomplete story. So we've cast them as a villain. And there are villains, there are real bad people out there, but for the most part, these are good people just going about their daily lives. Nobody's trying to be an idiot. Nobody's trying to, screw up. I mean, the presumption is that we're seeking the good, to sort of borrow from Aquinas. We have these basic inclinations, and everybody's going out there trying to do the best they can as they understand it or see it. And so, that's where I'd come back to the solutions focus, which is like, what do you want out of life? Where are you headed? How can we get you there? How can I help you? Right? If this is your team, what's the good life look like for you? What do you want out of your job? What do you want from your role? How can I support you? And when things come up and challenge you and knock you off that course, it's, acknowledge it. It's okay to, again, feel the pain from these types of things, but it's getting back up and it's moving back on that course. Or if you've decided based on life experience to go in a different direction, go in the different direction. And I think as we go through these experiences, you with the losses you've experienced, I with the losses I've experienced, it's being that help, right? That is able or at least willing to guide others that are going through these things. Like, hey, look, you're not alone in this. You feel like you're alone. You do, because I've been there and I felt alone.
Oh yeah.
But you're not alone. And so, how can I help? And I'm not just saying that as a platitude, like I really mean it. When you ask somebody, how are you doing? I ask people on my team, and people will be like, good. I'll make it not a game, but I'll just say, you know what, that's not convincing. You told me good, but that sentence, like, life kind of sucks. Like, how are you really doing? And I really want to know how you're really doing. How's your husband? How are your kids? And knowing enough about the people around you to ask those questions and just sort of check in with certain things, key relationship, kids, whatever that might be, to make sure they understand that you do see them and you are creating space for them if they need that space. And it's not to, excuse poor performance or things like that. It's is not going to be a cop out or whatnot for not showing up. Because I think we want to show up, we want to use our strengths, we want to do meaningful work, we want to make a difference in the world around us. So it's doing those two things at the same time.
Dude, you're dropping bombs here, man. One thing I wanted to ask you about before we get to the your brother's death is there's something you said much earlier, and I want to come back to it because I think it's a really important thing. And you mentioned about sometimes you have this tendency of like, I listen to your experience and I'm like, oh my God. And, people listen to my experience and say, oh my God. And, as time passes, you can tend to look back on the experience and start to maybe minimize them or whatever. And so I'm curious, how do you think about the idea of acknowledging the enormity, let's say, or the impact of your past experiences without letting them define you for the rest of your life?
That's Jason, that's
I'm
kind
asking
of like,
for I'm asking for a friend.
yeah, well, that's like family of origin issues, right? I mean, it's going to leave a mark on who you are, right? I mean, this is sort of like the mold with wet cement. The cement's going to take the form of the mold, whether it wants to or not. So I mentioned earlier sort of this tendency to gaslight yourself, right? Like it wasn't all that bad because it's the only thing you know, right? It's what you know. So, people might ask you, how does it feel to lose a daughter? And you can say it absolutely sucks. Or how does it feel to lose a spouse? And you can say it absolutely sucks. With childhood trauma, they can say, how does it feel to lose a parent to mental illness? And you go, well, there's like the before and there's the after. And I can't remember the before and I can't remember a lot of the after. I remember bad things, but I don't know what the alternative looks like. All I know is that I had this experience. So it doesn't define us, right? It doesn't justify or excuse poor performance or bad decisions that we make. We have agency. So I think that's the tension, right? I mean, you've asked the big question, which is how can you go through all this crap without it controlling the way your story plays out, right? You've sort of got this backstory. If I look at my older brothers, I've got a backstory that should play out the same way that theirs does, right? Substance abuse and broken relationships and incarceration. And so, why is my story different? And I could say, well, I'm such a strong person. I'm such a great man. I've got,
Right.
right. That's
Yeah.
the narrative is I'm the overcomer. And then you say, okay, but for the grace of God, there go I, right? Going back to these bad decisions, there's a few things. I think again, it just comes back to it helped a lot that I had a younger brother that gave me purpose and focus, and it meant a lot that I found. I don't want to say freedom, but I found focus in the ritual of the immediate, right? Again, dishes, laundry, school, these things that simply had to be done, had to be taken care of. You can see it with people who grow up on farms. They wake up at 4 a.m., you go take care of the cows because the cows have to be taken care of. They don't care how you feel. You have to do the work. You have to show up. And sort of leaving the feelings to sort themselves out. And that becomes a defining attribute of, potential pitfall and peril of focus on what has to be done. Do what has to be done. Do it. But make sure that you are giving yourself space to check in on yourself and acknowledge the fact that this is taking an effect on you. 10-year-olds do not do this typically. 10-year-olds are not involved with psychotic parents and breakdown. 17-year-olds are not, again, taken by a parent, non-custodial parent and checked into a psych ward. Like these things don't happen. And then, again, law enforcement and brothers and all of that. We can react to it. Or again, coming back to this, we can make a decision. So my younger brother and I would very deliberately make a point of being at the gym. We worked out, we did martial arts, we did things to proactively build into ourselves. And this is not, we're not starting a company, we're not monetizing things, but we are making decisions to build into ourselves proactively. Instead of being at a party, instead of surrounding myself with people making bad decisions, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to make what I think is a good decision, or at least not a bad decision. So again, it's reactionary to what I'm seeing and what I'm going through, but it just simply reinforces the point that number one, I have agency, and number two, I'm choosing a good decision, right? I'm not choosing a bad decision. And, to your point of so many of us go through what I don't want, right? What is 2026 going to look like? Well, I don't want it to look like this. Don't be specific, name something, have a goal and work towards that goal. Okay, well, what goal? What if I pick the wrong goal? Again, these are, red herrings.
Totally.
It's not right goal versus wrong goal. It's having a goal. It's having something to give you focus. It's having that fixed point again that you are working towards. That is probably the biggest thing. So it has affected me. To answer your question, it has affected me fundamentally. But the default is to acknowledge weakness. It's to come back to fixed points. It's to come back to do what has to be done, regardless of how you feel about it. But you have to come back and deal with the feelings. You have to. You have to process the feelings. You have to acknowledge that it's doing something to you. And again, name it, break the spell that it has over you. When we're struggling with anxiety and depression, there's so much power in saying, you know what? It's a really hard time of year, really hard time of year, whether it's an anniversary of a loss or an event or something triggers you, just to simply say, this is hitting you really hard and it sucks and I don't want to feel it, but I've got it. And so now what am I going to do with it? What is the choice that I've got? And what am I going to do with this? And not to bury it, right? That's one thing. To ignore it is a choice, but that doesn't process it and it doesn't put it in a spot where it won't rear its head again and come back and bite us.
So I want to make sure, I want to be conscious of time here, obviously, but I want to make sure that I give you some space to talk about your brother's death and the aftermath. Yeah, I'd love to hear what happened. And because it sounds like you were feeling, based on our conversation, it sounds like you're feeling optimistic about, maybe a post-prison life for him in some way.
Yeah, that was the pivot, right? I mean, he'd been in probably 17, 18 years. I was tracking him, minimum security prison, maximum security prison in San Quentin, in solitary confinement in San Quentin. Optimistic about the future. Family would tell me sort of the bad things about him. He radicalized, he did this, he did that. My sort of best performing post on LinkedIn tied back to me letting my 6-year-old talk to him. He'd call and he'd talk, and my 6-year-old wanted to talk to him. And, when he went in, he had a 2-year-old. This was hard. He had a 2-year-old when he went in. And so here he's got a little 6-year-old niece he's never met who wants to talk to him. And it wrecked him, right? It absolutely wrecked him. I gave him the phone, or I gave Samantha the phone. When I got it back, he was a mass of tears, right? In whatever prison yard he was. But the focus was on the future, right? The focus was not on the past. The focus was not on how he had screwed up. The focus was not on rubbing his nose in anything. That is not my role. That is not my job as a brother. It's to lift up, it's encourage, it's to give hope, it's to give that sort of focus and just say, good times lie ahead. And that was the focus. Our discussions were always positive and optimistic. He was always encouraging of me. I'd say he believed in me more than I believe in myself. He was the risk taker and the entrepreneur. He was the big guy who was full of life. And that's, for it to come to a sudden sort of violent end, it sort of takes the wind out of your sails. And, ironically, maybe irony is the wrong term, but he died on my wedding anniversary, right? So again, it takes this beauty of this good, normal life that I have with a wife and 3 daughters, and it sullies it with the death of this brother in prison. And it's sort of like your worlds collide and they converge, and what do you do with it? And, my wife would say, well, I'm not going to acknowledge it happened on our anniversary. It happened the day before, right? She just wants that. She wants me to not have these worlds collide and converge. So I try not to focus on that. I just, he was there. We had these conversations and they stopped. I talked to him the Friday before he died. He died on a Thursday. He didn't call me that entire week for whatever reason. He called my mom. He was concerned about his safety and well-being. And then I got a phone call from my niece, a phone call that no 17-year-old girl should have to make. And, just like that, he's gone. And, where I'm at with work, I let my boss know, hey, something happened. I'm off. I'm off. I've got to process this. And, to your point, we'd been working towards something. We had a vision, right? We're writing a book. It's supposed to be 30 chapters. We're in chapter 27 and it just ends. And so it's the loss of him. It's the loss of acknowledging the loss of control. This is not the way it's supposed to end. It's maybe beating myself over being optimistic. There's that tendency of like, how dare you think that you could rewrite the story or help rewrite the story of this guy and put him on a redemption path. You're an idiot for thinking you could do that. And I just say, you know what, though? I'm okay with that. I want to be optimistic. I want to believe in people. I want to appeal to the angels, right? The better side of our character. I want to see potential in people. And so, then it quickly became a matter of pivoting, and my niece asked me to eulogize him. And this is a guy I had not seen in, 20 plus years, but we talked weekly, multiple times a week. And how do I tell a story about this guy? And how do I speak about him when 20 years have been spent in prison, right? Where's the worth and the value? And for a lot of people, they might say you're wasting your time and energy with somebody who's a throwaway to society, right? He's the bad guy. It's not a mental health crisis. He's a bad guy, right? He's convicted and charged with multiple felonies, or charged and convicted of multiple felonies. And cut your bait and move on. Like, just focus on, things that matter and can actually have an ROI instead of this sort of loser deadbeat. And I just fundamentally reject that, right? I reject saying that some people are more important, more valuable than others. He's in my life. I have duties and obligations to him. To support and to encourage and sort of see this through. It was a hard thing to fly out to California, to not know what I was going to say, to have to sort of wing it. There's the Jeff I knew and the Jeff I talked to, and maybe it was all a lie and a ruse and a facade. And maybe it was, right? Maybe he was always just putting on his best airs with me because I could put money on his commissary account. And frankly, I don't care, because what I'm responsible for is my reaction, how I show up, right? Is choosing to love and choosing to encourage and choosing to build into him, and to, again, appeal to better nature and to have a solution in mind or a focus on a vision in mind and supporting him towards that if that's what he wants. So it's that unsettled end, I'd say, is the thing that still sits with me. The phone, I keep the app on my phone, the reminders. I've, his contact information. I've got his ashes. My niece, had necklaces made with that. I've got those. I don't think my wife knows that, but it's just sort of looking back and reflecting on the story. It didn't end where I wanted it to. It didn't end how I wanted it to. But did I play my role faithfully? Right? Was I a good brother to him? Is there anything I could have done differently without going back and giving myself the benefit of what I know now, right? And thinking I could have rewritten it. Back to your point about the story, we fill the holes in. We can't go back and say, I should have seen it sooner. I should have known this. I should have done that. Maybe, but you didn't. And you've got to give yourself grace, right? The one thing I'll say is, there was a big part of me that blamed myself for ultimately how it ended up, because what if I had been more supportive way back when? What if I had been more involved way back when? What if? And we have to stop and say, you're playing God. You're playing God. You're thinking that had you done something differently, the world ends up, happily ever after. Don't do that. Don't do that to ourselves.
Yeah, you can't go back. I mean, it's the way people just grieving people just torture themselves. Like, if I go back and do X, if I had done X, then Y would have happened. But you don't know that. Even if you
No,
could, you don't know what would have happened. It could have turned out somehow even worse, or they might have died quicker, or who
right.
knows, man. Like,
No. So we have to give ourselves grace. We also have to acknowledge that we're going to screw up and make mistakes, and that's part of the human condition. We're going to fail people. We don't want to fail people. I'm not going to say you wake up and say, you know what, today I really want to fail my wife and my kids. But I might, right? It might
sure,
not
of
be a
course.
big thing, but it might be a little thing, right? Maybe I'm angry and I speak with a tone I'm too harsh with my youngest. Acknowledge it, apologize, make it right. And that's the other thing too, is just, we don't have any guarantees in life. That tomorrow that we think that we've got, it's not guaranteed.
Yep.
And this is not a sort of chase your bliss type of thing. That's just a matter of saying, look, we're imperfect. We're going through life. Life sucks sometimes. Make sure the people around you know that you love them, know that you care for them, know that you see them, know that you want to support and encourage them, and let them know that you understand life can be hard and they can struggle, and that is okay. To pretend like life is not hard, I think, is almost the ultimate insult to people. Maybe you've just had a very charmed life and you've never had to grind, or maybe you've never had to experience some of these losses, but that doesn't mean it's not hard. So I think those of us who have experienced hardship can say, yeah, sometimes it sucks. It does. And sometimes it feels like it's going to press all the air out of your lungs and you're not going to be able to breathe and the pain's going to be excruciating. Yeah, it's going to happen. And you're going to come to the end of that, and there's going to be this void, there's going to be this emptiness, there's going to be nothing, right? Maybe the pain ends with just a numbness or an emptiness, but what we need to do is we need to find that vision, that future, that focus, and we have to come back to those fixed points and those things that just have to be done, and we have to do them. And I think that gives clarity. I think just, it's that chop wood, carry water mentality of we have to do what has to be done. And I don't know that there really is any secret beyond that. Give grace, do the work, support and encourage other people. Life's going to be great. Celebrate. Life's going to be hard. Grieve, mourn. And I think the one thing I would realize in this, like right now, it's just felt very down for me, is the importance of celebrating when there's cause to celebrate. We have to refill our tank emotionally. We have to celebrate the good things in life. And this does not mean like the big things. It's really easy to say like, oh, promotion, celebrate. Oh, this big event, celebrate. The little things. We need to find a way to, I think, put more joy in our lives and celebrate just even the things that we so often take for granted, right? My wife was just reminding me, there's a video. It's like a guy waking up and everything in his house is wrapped in Christmas wrapping paper, and he's sort of exuberant over the fact that he's got electricity and running water, and he's got a wife and he's got a kid, and just this like novelty of, oh my gosh, life is so good because I've got all these things, and making sure we just see it. I think it's so easy to look past it. And we erode so much potential for joy and so much that can anchor us and carry us through hard times when we ignore the things that are right around us, right? Those friends that are there, they're present. The fact that you got a refrigerator full of food. I mean, it's easy to take it for granted until it's not there. And I just say we can't do that. We give up so much of the good when we just get rid of those things that are just there because they've always been there.
And what a great place to end it, Jonathan. It's obvious to me how, number one, how your experiences have shaped the person you are today. Especially when it comes to thoughtfulness and introspection, empathy, and service mindset towards other people. And I can imagine the people you work with and the people on your team are very, very grateful to have the opportunity to work with you. That's clear to me. So I want to say thank you. And I just one last question is, other than LinkedIn, is there any other way where if people want to learn more about you or, follow some of the stuff that you're putting out there, is there any other way for people to find you?
No, I'm pretty low key. LinkedIn's
Okay.
about it. So.
All right, man. All right, brother. Well, we will share your LinkedIn profile, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I
I really enjoyed this.
appreciate you putting this out there. So keep on doing what you do.
Take care.
You as well.